Okay, so this is the third video on the topic of stress. In this one, I want to discuss the relationship between physical health and stress, and perhaps get into some of the different coping, some of the theories behind coping. So as I suggested in the last and one of the previous videos, stress does not make you sick. What stress does is it uses resources that would otherwise have gone into keeping you from being sick. So again, it's this phenomena of the sympathetic nervous system, going back to chapter 2, where we talked about how you have the sympathetic nervous system, which is the one that uses lots of energy. It's the fight or flight, fight, flight. Actually, it's fight, flight, freeze. It reacts very quickly to threats in the environment. It feels sorry for you. It wants to protect you, right? The healing system, that's your parasympathetic system, or your rest and digest system. Stress, this phenomena, is the work of the sympathetic nervous system. Your fight, flight, or freeze response uses lots of resources. When your body and your mind are interpreting some sort of threat to your survival, now is not the time. When your body perceives and your mind perceives that there is an environmental threat, it stops using its resources to heal. And instead, it devotes all of its resources to protecting you. That is where your hands get cold, your circulation runs from your hands to your trunk, from your head to your trunk, and it's all about preparing you to mobilize, to get the dickens out of whatever environment you're in that you are feeling threatened, right? And again, sometimes in this very modern world, what's causing you to feel threatened is an exam that you're not prepared for. But your body's going to respond the same way. Blood's rushing from your appendages, from your head to your heart. Your heart starts to race because your body is ancient, and it is responding in a way that has served its survival over the millennia. And it's not. So this is where your brain, this is where your mind has to sort of talk to your body and say, hey, this is not a life-threatening thing. You know, my heart doesn't need to race like this. I need to think differently. So going back to the first slide, right? It's a matter of cognitive interpretation of the environment. But I'm ahead of myself. Okay, once again, so back to stress and health. So your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, your endocrine system, which is your hormone system, starts to flood your body with stress hormones, your cortisol, all these things that increase your heart rate, right? This is what's referred to as the general adaption syndrome. And you can see that on the next slide. There are 3 stages to this general adaption syndrome: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. What happens is you're feeling threatened, right? You have an exam set down in front of you. You just got a bill in the mail, right? And that crap feeling that you get, that very quick, that rush of fear, of dread, whatever that emotion, that's your alarm, right? And then eventually, so if you look at this slide, right, you're going along here and you're in good health, and then something bad or something happens and it needs a lot of your resources. Well, then you see a drop in your health, because this alarm is triggering a lot of resources, a lot of energy is going into fighting whatever this threat is, instead of maintaining your heart rate, healing yourself, fighting off the cold virus. And there's this drop in your overall health. For me, it almost always happens at the beginning of the fall semester, right? Probably around October, that there's a period of time. And actually, at the very early stages of the stress response, your health might improve because your system is reading this, there's a threat. And so it kicks up all of its resources. After all of those resources have been thrown at a demand, or at a need, or at an environmental need, eventually, right? Eventually you run out of resources. So you see here, alarm stage, there's this drop in health. Okay, your body said, okay, we got to manage this. We got to kick up. We got to throw more energy at this problem. And you see the curve goes up. This resistance. So you might get healthier, right? You might, but this can't sustain itself. You only have so many resources to devote to whatever this need is. And that's when you move to this level of exhaustion. So for instance, the semester starts August starts, I'm doing well. And it's not until about October that I start to feel kind of sickly. End of September, October. That's when I've hit this resistance steps. I run out of resources. So when you live in a chronically stressful environment, you're more likely, it's easier to get sick because we're actually stress a little bit is good. And that's what you see in this next slide is stress and performance. Things that are too easy when life is just sort of going along and there's not any challenges. See, here's the thing is we often refer to, if we use a different language, right? Like things that are stressful, what if we thought of them as challenges, as ways to grow? Because that's really what they are, is that we're going along and life is just the same. There's no threats. Something changes, well, that's a stressor or it's a challenge. Nevertheless, it requires our energy. And when we shift and focus our energy on this stressor, this challenge, that means there's fewer resources left over to keep us healthy. So that is why there's this relationship between stress or challenges or new things, whatever word we want to use, but there are things in the environment, our social and our psychological environment that require our resources. That's why we get sick, is not because stress doesn't have any germs, right? Stress doesn't make you sick. It just means that we're using resources to dedicate to that. And so if you look down here at this law of arousal, that things that are too easy, we don't put very much energy. And the law of arousal says is that moderately challenging, moderately stressful situations, that's where we'll actually perform our best. But we can't sustain those challenging situations for the long term because we're going to run out. So if you've ever taken a difficult class, maybe there probably was this sweet spot where you did really good. But if it went on for too long, you got burnt out, right? And that's really what this law of arousal says, is that we can devote a lot of energy to something for a short period of time, and we might actually do really well. But eventually we're going to run out of resources. If you come over to this next slide where we talk about stress and aging, one thing that, and I hope these links still work, I want to double check them, put them, maybe find them someplace else, but one theory as to how stress is related to aging is cortisol, which is a really important stress hormone. And it uses lots of energy. So the idea is that when our DNA is exposed to cortisol over the long term, it starts to rot. So aging and cellular repair, every time our cells repair, they replicate your DNA. Well, your cells can only repair themselves a certain number of times before they lose their ability to replicate. And what cortisol does is it actually causes the end of your DNA or your telomeres to dissolve. So stress reduces the number of times that your cells can reproduce themselves. So when you're in a high stress environment, your cells basically rot faster and you can't replace them at the same rate that somebody who doesn't experience the same amount of stress. So I don't know if you've noticed, but the way poor people seem to age more rapidly than economically privileged people, and that has to do with that they can de-stress, right? That they can check out, and poor people live in this they're constantly soaking or saute, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but they're saturated in cortisol. And cortisol is a stress response, and cortisol reacts very, very quickly. Okay, in the next slide, in the next lecture, I want to talk about some of the psychological factors, specifically locus of control, and the difference between optimism and pessimism.